Ishmael means God hears, and Isaac means funny. Thank God God has a sense of humor. So it was predicted that Ishmael would fight his brothers, fight his family. You know, he would be like Genesis says, a certain kind of man. He'd constantly be in conflict. And Isaac and Ishmael didn't get along. But they were both blessed. They were both blessed that they would each have many, many multitudes of children. And these are, today we have this blessing come true. That the majority of the world's population believe in the oneness of God and Father Abraham. This is how this all came true. That Ishmael would have a great nation. And Isaac would have kings of many nations. And the chosen bloodline was Isaac's, was not Ishmael's. But Abraham loved Ishmael very much, and he was also blessed with many blessings. So let's recap all this. Hosea. Beginning of the calendar, birth of Jesus. Joel. Beginning of the calendar, birth of Jesus. Beginning of Jesus' ministry, 30 AD. Daniel 9. (27) 30 AD. Beginning of ministry, 34 AD. Crucifixion. Daniel 8. 1844 AD. Beginning of the Bob's ministry. Daniel 7 mentions 1260. 1260 AH is 1844 AD. 1260 AH begins with the beginning of the Islamic calendar, which was 622 AD. Well, 622 AD is 1080 from the same anchor date of Daniel 9, so it's 3 days, separated by 3 days. The Jesus prophecy. Okay. The end of Daniel. Daniel 12. Well, first of all, this section of Daniel 7 through 9, it has all these religions. Jesus, when Muhammad's calendar began, the Bab, and it has many, many dates of Jesus, and they're all connected and verified with Luke 3:23. Jesus was 30 years old, and John, the 4 Passovers, possibly 4. It's all verified and connected. Also, these same numbers, these similar numbers, where all the most important significant events of religious history are again verified using with these same religions and at the end of Daniel. So we have 30 AD. Jesus began his ministry. 610 AD, Muhammad began his private ministry. 614 AD, Muhammad began his public ministry. Now these dates are a little fuzzy. 610 to 611, 613 to 614. Also, 1863 AD, Baha'u'llah began his private ministry. 1867 AD, Baha'u'llah began his public ministry. And the Baha'is aren't sure, they're not very certain on when he began his public ministry. It could have been 1866 AD, so that's a little fuzzy too. And since we're looking at the Islamic calendar, that's accurate. It includes portions of each year on the AD Christian calendar. So the other one is 1844 AD, from the largest statue or abomination in the world, So, at the end of Daniel, you got Jesus, Muhammad twice, the Bab, and Baha'u'llah twice. Wow. Same religions as in the middle of Daniel. It's a marriage. It's the seal of prophecy. It's a sign. Although this one isn't the same seal. It's not the same standard because it doesn't have the name, it doesn't have the who, what, when, why, where. It doesn't have all of these given about a certain promised one. So, now the who, what, when, why, and where, that's also given elsewhere of the different religions, including Muhammad. Just look at Psalms 68, a variation of 86, and Habakkuk, and it's all there. And Baha'u'llah too. Ezekiel 43 and 4. Ezekiel 4, Ezekiel 43. And perhaps there are more. Okay, so we go from there to Leviticus 26. And isn't it a miracle that all these religions are all foretold about concretely and exactly, repeatedly? According to science, when you have repeated results, that's a proven fact. This is provable. You can have faith in this. This is real. This is God's real plan. This is real covenant. This is the reality of the world of religion. Leviticus 26. There are some Jewish dates in there that are significant. And 34 AD, the Jesus date, 614 AD, Islamic, 1844 AD, the Bab, and 1863 AD when you combine it with Joel. So that's Baha'u'llah. Again, the 4 promised ones. Wow. And then when you look at Joel combined with Leviticus 26, you have, Joel refers to the beginning of Jesus' birth and him beginning his public ministry 30 years later, 30 AD. And you got to combine Joel and Leviticus 26 to get the Muhammad date when Muhammad began his public ministry. But Muhammad's birth date wasn't celebrated. So, and 1844 is the 360 times 7, so that's when the Bab's religion began, and 19 years later is when Baha'u'llah began his private ministry. So it's all connected. It's all verified. There's 3 just witnesses. 3 just witnesses. How many witnesses are required to make a judgment in Judaism? 2. We have 3. A 4th one is the Great Pyramid of Egypt. And it's referred to as the Great Pyramid chronology. And it very clearly gives, in many ways, often repeated multiple ways, especially the year of the Bab, these same values. And it's profound, and it's a miracle. It's beautiful. And if you read Isaiah 19:19, it refers to a great witness to the Lord in the middle of Egypt, or the midst of Egypt, and at the border. So, the border is the perimeter. How can it be in the middle and the perimeter at the same time? Well, there's an ancient inner border in Egypt that separates elevation-wise Upper Egypt or Higher Egypt from Lower Egypt, elevation-wise. And the Nile flows north. So Upper Egypt is actually in the south. And the Nile flows into the Mediterranean Sea, and at the mouth of the Nile, at the apex of the pyramid, they call it the delta, the natural pyramid of the delta of the Nile, that's where the Great Pyramid is. So if the river Nile, with the word in Hebrew for the Nile River, it means the mightiest, the most mighty, powerful, the arm of God, mighty. If it could speak at its mouth, what would it say? What would it witness to, or testify to, or covenant to? Well, the Great Pyramid of Egypt. There's your answer. It's all in Isaiah 19:19. It calls it a witness to the Lord, and it gives the location, and that's exactly what it is. Now, Professor Smith, he recorded the numbers that can be used to determine this great chronology or timeline that has all these same years that are given in prophecy that I've just given you, mostly. But at each point on the timeline, when a major event happens, like when Jesus began his new ministry, there is a 3D spatial symbolic change in the internal passageways and chambers of the pyramid that symbolically represent what took place at that time. So I could give examples, but this is getting a little long, so I hope that you will thirst to understand and figure out how these amazing, wondrous, miraculous prophecies are unfolded before your eyes in 3D at these exact times given. It is amazing. It's so awesome. God, I love it. So there's your other witness, your fourth witness. Now the fifth witness takes us to Jesus. So Jesus had, he said, first of all, he said, no man knows the day or the hour when I'm going to return, basically. He said, no man knows the day or the hour. Well, we haven't been working with days and hours. He said, no man knows the day or the hour but the Father only. We know the year. Jesus gave us the year, not the day or the hour. It could be any day or hour within the year. But we got it down to the year. That's good. We know what happened during that year. Okay, so what did Jesus say about when he would return? He didn't say much. But he did say that he would give us one sign. People wanted proof that he was the promised one. He said he'd give one sign, and only one sign, that he was the promised one. And he said, if you destroy this temple, it will be rebuilt in 3 days. Whereas the temple is a symbol for Jesus' body, and Jesus' body is a symbol for the believers. All right. Another time he said it is when they asked him for a sign of his coming. He said, I'm only going to give you the sign of Jonah. Whereas Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the whale, so the Son of Man will be in the heart of the earth. And so he was referring to after his body is crucified, in 3 days, it would rise up. And this is usually translated to mean that after his body is crucified, which we know happened in 34 AD, that in 3 days, his body would rise from the dead. That's one way of translating it. However, Jesus said he always speaks in parables. So there are other ways of understanding this prophecy. And in Hebrew, the word day, it doesn't mean a 24-hour period. It also means from sun down to sundown, from sunset to sunset. It also means, a period of time, a duration of time. And it can also translate to a dispensation. Like the day of Moses was when Moses began his ministry to when Jesus began his ministry, perhaps. So, when did the day of Jesus begin? Well, it began when he was born. According to the universally accepted standard of our calendar, we know when our calendar began. Okay, so what verification do we have that the dispensation of Jesus can be seen as the day of Jesus? Well, Haley's Bible Handbook says it very clearly. Towards the beginning, it says that a day represents the dispensation of Jesus, and he offers his arguments. I've found personally in the book of Joel, there is a verse that indicates that the word day, that's translated today, represents the dispensation of Jesus. So this isn't a foreign concept. This is a Christian concept. Haley's Bible Handbook. So, Jesus, in Matthew 24, he talks about the abomination that makes desolate. It's going to last, he says that prophecy is going to refer to when he's going to return. Okay? So, let's get into a bigger context here. In Matthew 24, they're talking about the temple. And his disciples are praising this amazing temple, the temple of Herod. And Jesus says, well, not one stone will be left upon another. So they knew what Jesus was referring to, since he always spoke in parables, and by that time they've gotten used to understanding and trying to figure out these parables. He spoke earlier about the temple being rebuilt in 3 days and him returning. Well, they didn't say, what makes you think the temple will be destroyed? They didn't say anything like that. They were speaking in parables too. They said, their reply was, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming? You see, they were speaking regarding the parable, his return. What will be the sign of your coming? So they asked 2 questions. When will these things be? When will the temple be destroyed? When will his body be killed? And when will he return? And what will be the sign of your return? And Jesus, his reply was a long list of signs of his return. That was his reply. But after you get distracted, and the Word of God is distracting, because it's parables and it's beautiful and makes people feel intoxicated and high, so good and so in love with Jesus and the profoundness, and your heart fills up, and it's distracting. Because if you want to figure this out, you got to pay attention. You got to use your intellect and dig for the knowledge. That's how you figure it out. So don't get distracted. Don't let that good feeling distract you from your purpose. Be on your watch. Find the promised one. Okay, so he answers the one question, what will be the sign of your coming? Well, what about the other question? When will these things be? Eventually he says, refer to Daniel, where he talks about the abomination that makes desolate, standing in the holy place. Well, Daniel didn't say anything about the abomination that makes desolate standing in the holy place. He said the abomination that makes desolate will have a duration of 1290 years. Approximately, that's what he says, according to Haley's Bible Handbook anyways. That's one interpretation. Okay, so that's what he said. Now, as far as standing in the holy place, where's that? So, as we know, King Manasseh put an abomination or an idol in the temple in 677 BC. And that may refer to Jesus' return. But all right. That certainly may. That is one of his returns, actually. But we're going to look for another one. So, the temple was destroyed in 70 A.D. So this was just a few years after Jesus was crucified. And 1290 years after 70 A.D., there's nothing eventful or significant that took place there. So there's more to this prophecy than meets the eye. The holy place normally refers to a room in the temple, but it also refers to the one place on earth where the temple can exist. This is the Jewish temple where the Jews can do their sacrifices. And this is by the law of Moses. By the law of Moses, once the temple site is chosen, it can't be moved. And today we call it the Temple Mount. So there's the holy place right there. And what exists on the holy place today? Well, there's a Muslim mosque there. And they consider that site to be their third holiest site. Mecca, the Qibla, is the first, and then there's the second, and then the Temple Mount's their third. Well, to the Jews, this isn't just their holiest site. This is the one place where they can have their temple and fulfill their covenant, or try to. So this is really a major issue to the Jews. They really want to have their temple there, but how can they do that? There's a Muslim mosque there instead. And they can't just tear down the Muslim mosque, because that would upset some people. And there probably would be a terrible war as a consequence. So let's look at the word abomination. Abomination means idol. It's translated to that often. It's referring to an idol often, but if you look at the literal meaning, it means rolls of dung. It means rolls. And it's referring to something that's just detestable, horrible, repugnant, just disgusting, vile, hated. They hate it. So how do the Jews feel about this mosque being on their one holy place in the world, preventing them from having the covenant, causing them to be under all these curses? So in a way, one can interpret these symbols of the abomination that makes desolate standing in the holy place as to the Muslim mosque being in the Jews' holy place, preventing them from their trying to practice their covenant and having their temple. That's one way it can be interpreted as. And it would be an abomination to the Jews, because they would be hating and detesting the situation, when they can easily build a temple there if only it were available. So this is what Jesus says. He says, when it's standing in the holy place. Well, this is an interpretation, standing. This is a word that is how it's often interpreted. But the Hebrew word also means set. That's where this abomination is set, in the holy place. It's not like it has to be a person standing there. So a lot of people are awaiting an Antichrist to come and stand in the holy place, and then Jesus will return and rise up in the sky. Well, that's not necessarily how it has to be, because Jesus said this word, it's also interpreted as set in the holy place. So, and the abomination that makes desolate doesn't have to be a person. So we've got to break through these barriers, repeated hammering of concepts of how these prophecies have to come true, when in reality they don't have to come true that way at all. Now, those are clouds also, the clouds of the clergy class that they've cast on the people like a spell that's keeping them from seeing the reality of God's religion. So that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to get through to the reality of it. So, okay, so yeah, the starting point. What did Jesus talk about? He talked about when he would return, and he said it refers to what Daniel said about the abomination of desolate. And in particular, he said it's going to be set in the holy place. So it probably has something to do with Islam. Now, if you want to make a mathematical formula out of what Jesus said about when he would return, well, let's look at this. Since we're already here, let's look at this part about Daniel. What Daniel says is, first he says, the daily sacrifice will cease. Therefore, an old covenant ends, a new covenant begins. And since Jesus said this is referring to when he will return, we know that this is going to take place after Jesus. So this covenant he's talking about that's going to cease is probably his covenant. And then a new covenant will begin. So the first variable is X, the day of Jesus, the dispensation of Jesus before his covenant ceased and a new covenant began. And the new covenant is referred to as the abomination that makes desolate. It's something hated, and it makes desolate. And this new religion will last for 1290 years. Then after that, Jesus will return. This is according to Matthew 24. They're talking about the temple being rebuilt in 3 days. So the mathematical formula that we have is x plus 1290 years equals the year of Jesus' return. X plus 1290 years equals the year of Jesus' return. So the x is the dispensation of Jesus, the duration of the dispensation of Jesus, which is a length of time, plus 1290 years equals y, the year of Jesus' return. There's your formula. The other formula we have, and we know this is referring to this other formula. The previous formula refers to this one. So they're linked, they're using the same variables, is the 3-day prophecy. Destroy this temple, in 3 days it'll be rebuilt. Destroy Jesus' body, in 3 days it'll be rebuilt. That is the year of Jesus' crucifixion, 34 AD. We know that. 34 AD plus 3x equals y. So 3 days later, and he will return. 34 AD plus 3x equals y. This is our second formula. So now we have two formulas. One is x plus 1290 equals y, and the other is 34 AD plus 3x. No, 34 AD plus 3x equals y. The other one is x plus 1290 equals y. So now we have enough information to solve for our variables, and we can get the date of Jesus' return. But there's a problem, and that problem is that we have different units. And in math, we have to have the same units if we're going to combine equations like this. So one unit is the AD BC system on the calendar, and the other unit is a length of time, amount of years, 1290 years. So what we do is we convert it from 34 AD to a length of time. And since the calendar begins at 1 AD, not 0, since it begins at 1 AD, it converts to 33 years from the beginning of the calendar. So we have 33 years from the beginning of the calendar plus 3x equals y. And we also have x plus 1290 years equals y. Now you can solve. So it won't hurt to just solve this in our heads real quick. You set, since we can set both sides to x. We can set x equals one equation and x equals to another equation. Then you take the x and you plug it in, so you have one equation equal another equation, and then you solve for y. No, first you want to solve for x. So anyways, you do the math, you solve for x and y, and what you get is two values, a value for x and a value for y. Now, what you're going to get is not going to be sensible because it's a year, it's a duration from the beginning of the calendar. In order to convert it back to a calendar year, you have to add +1 to each. So first you solve the math, then you add +1 to each, and then you have 2 AD calendar dates. Now that makes sense. That's sensible. So basically what we have here is we have a function, a mathematical function. You put in two values, it puts out two values. So you put in 34 AD and 1290, and it gives you two values as a result. And I'm going to suggest that one make these calculations not only for 34 AD and 1290, that's the year Jesus' physical body was crucified, but also the year that the temple was destroyed, because he also refers to that in these prophecies. So solve it for 34 AD and 1290, and also solve it for 70 AD and 1290. And I'd also suggest that instead of just solving it for those two, You solve it for